Welcome to POWTECH Virtual Talks. Thomas Ramme from Volkmann will talk about advanced powder handling in the additive manufacturing industries, safe vacuum conveying and more around 3D printing. Have fun and enjoy.
Predominantly the POWTECH traditionally was more about handling of organic powders, chemical, pharma, food. And in the last couple of years, the metal powders came also more into focus. They were there before, but of course, with additive manufacturing, there's a boost really in metal powder and metal powder handling. And today, I would like to give you a little overview of what can be done around the 3D printing in terms of powder handling. It's only a nutshell, and it's only really an introduction. I have a lot of slides just to give you ideas what is possible, what is already done. I have to say a lot of this is also not so for public notice, because we have a lot of NDAs with many OEMs, but also a lot of end users in this field. And of course, if this goes into medical applications, it goes into aerospace, into rocket science, really. So it's very dedicated areas where this is applied. But there's also a trend to try to not to use it only for single parts, for prototypes, but also for use it into the mass production. And we will come to that also in a minute. I also have a few words about Volkmann, family-owned business for almost 50 years here in Soest. What you can see on the left-hand side here, this is our new trial and test center, where we have several clean rooms, because sometimes we want to do particle measurement. We want to set the temperatures, humidity. We want to have very clean rooms to do the trials. We want to simulate a certain conveying height here and conveying distances, especially in AM when you come to multi-machine layouts where 50 printers are used. You automatically have by that longer conveying distances. And it's always interesting to see, can you overcome long conveying distances with vacuum conveying? So we do a lot of tests and trials. We have a powder lab there where we can analyze the powder before and after conveying or sieving. And also the specialties, we do a lot of in-house. We have a deep manufacturing center behind these buildings, which you can't see. There's a second car park on the other side. And it's a typical German Mittelstand, but we have daughter companies in the US, in UK, France, with a good distributor in Japan. So we have a kind of worldwide coverage of the powder handling business. And just out of the nutshell here, a little bit out of our company, we do a lot of engineering. We have a standardized product range, but we do a lot of customization to make the product really fit for special purposes. It's about vacuum generation here, vacuum pumps, applications for vacuum, but also, as Dr. Hortman said, explosion protection. We do a lot of seminars to educate our customers about, for example, electrostatic charges. And especially if we come to metal powders, we just had one example where a customer had a fire with titanium powder. And the reason for the fire was that he used a standard industrial vacuum cleaner. The suction nozzle and the hose was black, but it was not dissipative. It was not anti-static. It was just black plastic. And then by conveying this with high velocity, there's a chance that you have a propagating brush discharging in the conveying line, which is just illustrated here. So this is part of our seminar stuff. Manufacturing, we have traditional sheet metal manufacturing to make the conveyors. We have subtractive manufacturing for doing valves, piston vibrators, and actuators for drives and rotary valves. And also we do 3D printing in-house, especially for gaskets and seals for prototypes and this stuff. And of course, we are not only dealing with metal powders, we are dealing really with any kind of powders. But of course, the metal powders are one of a kind. They have some special properties, and here's just a little overview. Of course, all these alloys which we convey, like TI-64 or nickel 7718. And some of them, like stainless steel powder, they are relatively easy to handle. They are heavy, they have a high bite density, but you can see here from the flow properties, they are relatively good flowing and non-sticky, and you can very easy also empty the conveying line after conveying with these products. But on the other hand, you have powders like aluminum powder, which can be very sticky, and you see the angle here is much steeper. So here the flowing probabilities are not so good. So again, very different materials, also the morphology of the product, the particle size. Normally, idea would be a sphere, but you will later see sometimes it's not a sphere. You have various shapes, and so the product behaves different with other particle geometries. So it's a big range, and also if we talk about sieving, we have relatively fine fractions here which we need to sieve. These are just examples taken from our sieving station, which we recently had. So it's a big variation of powders, and all the different methods of 3D printing require a certain particle size distribution for the product. Metal powder handling is not that new. I mean, this picture we took, I think, nearly 20 years ago, and the application was there really to make the powder. So that is as a metal powder producer, as a metal powder manufacturer. There we came first in touch with metal powders a long time ago. And the question was there, can we handle this heavy metal powder? We had conveyed tungsten cobalt, and then we had the pure tungsten powder with a bite density of 10 kilogram per liters. So that is quite heavy. I think this was only topped by our applications in the nuclear industry, where we had some uranium oxide with bite density around 13 kilogram per liters. And you can see it's a huge range. I mean, here we talk about metal powders, and in the chemical industry, we talk about polymer powders, where the bite density might be only 0.1 kilogram per liter. So it's a factor of 100 difference alone in the bite density, with which of course affects the conveying. So there was the first test. Can you lift these powders with vacuum more than 10 meters? Was one question I had. And you know, I come from the trial phase of this vacuum conveyor, so I did a lot of trials on my own. It's a customers, and really to prove that this works, and the modification which needs to be done to be able to handle this very heavy powders. So and then, let's say 17 years ago, we were approached by the industry for handling metal powders around additive manufacturing. So I have to say we are the pioneers there in this market. We are the first ones handling all these powders. And there was like a 3D printer, and there were certain points where powder needs to be picked up. And very simply spoken, you can pick up the powder by vacuum. And by vacuum, I mean, with this vacuum conveying systems, we can apply up to minus 910 millibars, so nearly 91% vacuum. So we can nearly apply full vacuum. And sometimes this is really desired to have a dense phase and plug flow conveying, to convey with less air, but more with the pressure, more with the vacuum, which also reduce the amount of feeding air. So you have less contact of the powder with air. And also, of course, to get high transfer rates on the heavy powders. So this is a typical layout of a simple vacuum conveying system. And if we would have this presentation 17 years ago, this would be finished by now, because that was the application where it all started. And just to see, to see the layout is always good, but real life looks like that. To pick up, very simple, with the suction wand to go into the machine. There is a build box. In this machine, the build box cannot be taken out. So you somehow have to go into the machine. You pick up the powder by the suction wand and transfer it to a hose in this case, because the distance is very short, and collect it basically here in the vacuum conveyor. The vacuum conveyor itself loads in the drum. That is a typical application where this all started. And of course, over the years, variations, other users of this. But this is a little mobile device, this vacuum conveyor. And of course, up to a certain amount of product handling, that is quite handy to use it. Before they were trying to get the material out by hand with little buckets, and of course that generates dust, and you have dust exposure. And of course, the tendency is to go step by step to more enclosed systems. But this is how it started. And then there was a question, okay, what else can be done with vacuum conveying on these machines? And of course, one of the advantages of vacuum conveying is that you can pick up at one point, but you can also pick up at a second point, one after the other, controlled by valves. So you can use it on several pickup points, and not only two, maybe 4, 5, 6, one after the other. You can pick up the material and bring it to one point. And if we talk here about the material which is not fused, which means it could be the over layer of the material which is put on the bed, or if it's in the unpacking station, if it's the not sintered powder. So by that you automatically have several potential pickup points for the powder. And the next step was then to just not only have a conveying process, but also to have a dosing process. It's quite important to have that too. And with this dosing process, then have a controlled way to load a sieve. And with a special kind of sieve which we use here, we can of course take out the oversize and collect it. This is like a package unit. So we said, okay, this is a functional unit, so we can make it as a unit on its own and call it POWTECH, powder transfer, recovery, and extraction system, which is really there for collecting material from various points, sieve it, getting the oversize out, and of course, getting the sieved material here. Usually there's a 50-liter container at the first place here to collect this already sieved material, which is then ready to be reused in the process. And also to illustrate that, just from the pack ties, you see that is a POWTECH unit on its own. And if you look inside, you would see that there's a vacuum conveyor on top, there's a dosing device, there's a sieve inside, the overside is taken to the side, and the sieved material is collected in a container here. So this is a typical application for POWTECH in the additive industry. And one little notice here, you see these little buckets here, or this here. We will come to this later when we talk about container filling and emptying. But you see on small machines, on small quantities, that is okay to handle with these bins. But of course, if you talk to customers who have 20 printers and the printers get bigger and bigger, the build boxes are getting bigger and bigger. So there will be a certain point where you might have to look in bigger vessels, containers to store your metal powder, because this, as you can imagine, needs a lot of manual handling if you do this all by hand. Yeah, this is the POWTECH solution for the additive industries. And one point is to collect the material here. Okay, that has been done, and then you can decide what you want to do with a good material. One question could be, why not use it on the 3D printer? And so with the second vacuum conveyor, you can again pick up from here and bring the material back to the printer. And that is also, you see in the industry, called closed loop powder circulation. So now you have a closed powder processing and handling. And if you don't want to use the material immediately after sieving, there's always a question of intermediate storing the material. And one possibility, of course, is to pick up from here with another vacuum conveyor system, conveyor here, to buffer the material for a certain time, and then get it to the sieving unit, or to pick up from here to get the sieved material and buffer this for a certain time. So storing and buffering of material is always an issue as soon as it comes to larger quantities of powders. And also, this is a nice graph always, but reality is always good to show some customers are using this modular structure of the vacuum conveyors for storing the material. And the neat little thing is here that you can pick up from here by a vacuum conveyor to get the material out. And here's a ready connection for a vacuum conveyor. You can take off the lid, put a vacuum conveyor on top, and and load the material with a vacuum conveyor. So you can fill and empty this as you like on this little silos. Main applications up to date are done under atmospheric conditions. So our, let's call it conveying gas, is ambient air. And there are couple of reasons for that, but there could be the requirement to handle the material also inert, especially if you have already a process in a machine which is taken place under the inert gas, which can be argon, which can be nitrogen, and this is illustrated here. Here you have already a process where the inert gas is available. So can you use vacuum conveying on that? And of course, as a carrier, you can also use kind of any gas. You can use CO2, argon, nitrogen, and then you have your product argon mixture, which you will transfer to the vacuum conveyor. And in the vacuum conveyor, you have at least one filter stage. So out of the vacuum conveyor, you have the clean gas coming out. And the clean gas, of course, finally goes to your vacuum pump to allow the vacuum conveying. And this is done and works not only in the metal industry. Imagine ground coffee. You don't want to lose the aroma, so you convey ground coffee under nitrogen. But this would require that all the gas you are taking out, you need to refill here. And of course, that can be if you have a high consumption of gas. And there's also the possibility, of course, to have a closed loop gas cycle to go out of your electrical vacuum pump back into your system and to have a closed loop gas cycle on this end. You need a little device, which I cannot mention here, to make this really smoothly working, but this is also done in industry. Yeah, and finally, on the POWTECH, it would mean that you take the vacuum from the pump, the exhaust from the pump in the end of the day, and put it back to the printer, and you have a closed loop inert circle. And some customers prefer not to have the POWTECH as a separate item, but also to integrate it into the machine. If the machine is big enough, with some space, and this is the machine you have seen on the graphs, and there's a vacuum conveyor here on top. So with the vacuum conveyors, I can make it only very short here in this seminar. There's a separate seminar about vacuum conveying and powder handling. We can cover that. And the big advantage is, as I said, that we can apply quite high vacuum, which allows us not only dilute phase conveying, but also dense phase conveying and plug flow conveying, which is sometimes really an advantage. The next step was we can make very dust-tight vacuum conveying systems, and they are used for highly toxic and cancerous materials. And that is on the vacuum conveyor side. But the next question was, what about the feeding side? How to get the material in the conveying line from a container or even from a bin? And for that, we made these glove boxes, which are on a constant negative pressure, even if you open the door, and you can bring in the powder in bags or little drums and lids and put it inside and empty it there, and then do the vacuum transfer from there to the vacuum conveyor. And you see here is a station like that, and oops, something wrong with the menu, which is also used in the pharma industry for high containment. You see a HEPA filter here. It's a push-push filter, so you can change the HEPA filter whilst the system is running, and this can help you to get the powder into the lines. And the next step was to combine this with our so-called vacuum cleaning devices, which we made for the automotive industries in terms of cleaning camshafts and crankshafts and all these machine parts by vacuum, to combine this. And this was ideal that 2 years ago, the IDEM project came into this, to digitalization and automation for the car industry of additive manufacturing, especially for serial parts. Driven by the BMW Group, we participated on this research project with a lot of other companies, and the results came into a so-called unpacking station, which is used in 3D printing, where we can unpack the powder from the build boxes, which you can see here. They are transferred automatically into this machine, turned upside down, and then we apply some energy to get the powder from the pieces and out of the build boxes. And again, this powder needs treatment. So there's a second station over here, including the sieves, the POWTECHs. The new material has to be brought in. The reused material might need some mixing with the new material. Also, some vacuum drying can be applied. So that is quite a complex station, and it's of course always very exciting and interesting to be part of such a research project. And then the last bit, I know time is running. The last bit is filling of emptying of containers. As I said, when you go to larger quantities, there could be the question first to load containers, for example, from a sieve, from a POWTECH to load into containers. And you need a kind of docking valve because some days a container is taken away. And the next step, of course, is to empty the containers, where you have the same question. You need a flexible docking port or connection on this end to empty this container. And this also we do for a long time for the so-called docking stations. This is a very basic station to show the principle. And of course, it can be expanded with dosing, with weighing, with further valves. So again, it's a quite modular design. And one step is, of course, to bring the container on top of such a station, then bring the container down. In some cases, this is an auto docking with a special gasket here, which makes a dust-tight connection. And then only the operator has to open this one here, this lever, and then the powder falls down and can be transferred by the vacuum. And there are so many examples, and this is really a very nice one because this is so obvious. On the left, you see common powder handling techniques today. In order to fill the internal OEM machine hopper, the operators are required to handle and transport multiple of these 10-kilogram plastic containers. It's repetitive, of course, and extremely time-consuming. And then during the process, often this container is on top here, but it needs refilling. So the customer has to go on the ladder several times to load the powder there. And of course, there's opportunity for spillage, and he can fall off the ladder. And of course, they often have to wear PPE, and it makes it very uncomfortable. And the solution to this very manual and basic handle, and also plastic waste, also is to go for containers, and then combine these containers with the docking station. And that is the Carpenter Additive Powder Life Auto Docking System. It includes a standard certified bulk powder hopper with a digital control interface. So the operators don't need to work from height and transport heavy loads. And this is combined with closed loop conveying systems we have already seen. And this docking station includes also weighing and dosing. And it was a 2 years project to design this and also to fulfill European ATEX and explosion protection regulations, as well as North American standards. So there's a lot of safety built into the system. And you see here the conveyor is on a hoist. So this conveyor can load the container at one time to fill it up to a certain weight. And the other conveyor here is connected on the bottom, so this can empty the container, and also the weight is taken, so you know how much powder it has gone into the machine. So this is one of the recent developments. Finally, the docking. There are certain possibilities for the docking. You can do it manual with clamps or with cam lock. And one is to use a split valve, where the passive part is connected here to the container, and the active part is located here. It's a pneumatic valve, pneumatic operated, and it can only open and close when there was successful docking of the two elements. So that is one further possible step to automate here the emptying and filling of containers. And finally, just a little glance into the POWTECHs here. You see the internal parts of the POWTECHs, and you see here we take the oversize out, either collect or also convey. But sometimes it's interesting to look at this after 63 micron sieving. We took a sample here out of this collecting bin, and we found these kinds of particle sizes. And you see not all of them are round. And it's quite interesting to see what you can sometimes find in the oversize and depending on the process and the kind of printing which has been done. Yeah, in a nutshell, really, I only wanted to give you an overview today. There's not much time left for ATEX and explosion protection, but I refer to this link, which you might use, where you can go back to the topic 4 here on the POWTECH virtual talks from February, where I go more into the details of ATEX and powder explosion protection. Well, thank you very much for your attention. I know it was quick, but I wanted to give you an overview. Thank you very much.